Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and we made it. Folks, we made it to the season finale of season 2 of Doctor Who, The Reality War. It's been a journey. It really has been a journey. Now, before we go any further, I do want to give a massive shout out to our sponsor for this season of Ups and Downs, Surfshark. We love working with Surfshark here on the channel, and it's something I know a lot of you will find incredibly useful as well. Using a VPN like Surfshark is a bit like having your own TARDIS. All of the important stuff stays private and secure when you're out and about online. Now, Surfshark also keeps you safe and secure when you're away from home as well, as your data is protected while using public Wi-Fi, so you don't suffer anything like identity theft or fraudulent purchases. Basically, you can use any old public Wi-Fi network, safe in the knowledge that you and your data are protected. Plus, you can even change your virtual location while traveling, so you can still get access to your BBC iPlayer or Disney Plus content while in another country. So if you're on holiday and you need your Doctor Who fix, you won't have to wait till you get back home to get it. Surfshark also offers 24/7 customer support and a 30-day money-back guarantee. And make sure you also check out Surfshark Alert, a breach detection system that notifies you of personal data leaks. So click the link in the description or use code WhoCulture at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring not just this video, but this entire season. And now, let's get into the ups and downs for the reality war.
Don't go in fear. Go with that lovely smile.
So we open the reality war just where Wishworld left off, with the Doctor falling from the Rani's bone tower, falling to the ground on a balcony, when all of a sudden, just before he hits the ground, the first up for the episode, Anita appears. The return of Anita, who we obviously saw in Joy to the World, the Christmas special, and was everybody's favourite character, the unexpected favourite character of that episode. And it was so great to see her in this episode. And the best thing about this, I think, is it made sense for her to be in this episode. Some things in this episode, some things in Doctor Who in general, don't actually make a lot of sense. But this actually did make sense. First of all, the Time Hotel. The whole concept of it is all of these places in time, including the future. So if the future is threatened, the whole concept of the Time Hotel is threatened. So it makes sense that the Time Hotel, as an institution, would want to fix the problem of the Earth ending in 2025. But it also makes sense in terms of where we last saw Anita at the end of Joy to the World. She got offered this job at the Time Hotel. She could use all of these doors in the hotel to get to all these places, help the Doctor. So I really like that. She wasn't just brought back for the sake of it, it worked in the context of the story. I also really loved that we saw her glimpsing into moments in the Doctor's life. I think 3 was enough moments to see. I think it wasn't overdone, but it was nice to see her just kind of looking in on different moments in the Doctor's life, her realisation that he was clearly never going to be for her, and that moment that we saw him dancing with Rogue. Great to have the Wedding of Rivers song in there. Didn't expect that on my bingo card, but that was great to see as well. But as I say, it wasn't overdone. But what I really, really love is just this whole concept of using the Time Hotel to wake everybody up. In fact, I think the first 15 minutes of this episode were great. I loved the first 15 minutes of everybody kind of waking up from this weird dream, this weird reality, and coming back into themselves and getting back into character and seeing them as we know them. And what I really love as well is the Doctor is back here. We have this confident Doctor instilling this confidence in everybody that everything's going to be okay and he's going to save them. This is what I love to see in the Doctor. And then we have this added mystery of Poppy and how significant Poppy is, and the fact that everyone's being introduced to the Doctor's daughter, and that there's clearly something going on here that we know is going to become important further down the line. But the first 15 minutes of this episode, loved it. The music, we all know I love Murray Gold, but the music worked really well. Just seeing everybody kind of wake up from this weird fever dream, loved it. So everyone's woken up from this dream, everyone's back to normal, as normal as you can be while you're still stuck in the wish world, but everyone's aware of who they are and they start to kind of devise a plan of what's going to happen. And then the Rani appears. And this does lead me to my first down for this episode, because what follows is this entire exposition-heavy scene that's very, very static. The staging of this scene where the Rani and the Doctor are kind of talking with each other, the Rani's explaining her grand plan, the Doctor's saying how this can't happen, why this isn't possible, lots of exposition. All the while, everybody else is just kind of standing there watching them. And I feel like, yes, this was a very important scene in terms of what's being revealed, in terms of the Rani revealing what her plan is with Omega, the whole revelation of them being sterile and what that means, and the significance of Poppy and why she's so important because she's an anomaly, she shouldn't exist. All of that is very important. But I just couldn't help but laugh at the fact that Anita was just lingering there in the background holding the door open. It just felt a little bit like it was clunky and very static. And even those who were in the scene weren't really responding in the way that you would expect them to. I mean, I've done lots of drama classes throughout my life, and one of the most important things that I have ever been taught is the art of acting is reacting. Why then were the soldiers? Why then was Colonel Sexy just standing there with his arms crossed? Why was he not pointing a gun at the Rani, the villain, the one that's caused all of this to happen? Why then were all the soldiers also just kind of standing there watching what was happening? I just felt like the staging of this particular scene felt off. It just felt like there was too many people standing around, not really doing anything and just watching things happen. It was like they were us, just watching it. But I feel like there should have been a little bit more movement. Why is Shirley not kind of scanning to see what's going on? How did she get in here? The Rani's just teleported in. That's a security breach. Why are the security not holding guns on the bad person? You know, it just felt a little bit static for me. And while it was an important scene in terms of the exposition, I sometimes feel that these exposition heavy scenes need to have something interesting going on so that you're not just standing there watching people talk to each other. And that's what we as the audience were doing, and many of the characters were doing as well. Anywho, this all happens. Mrs. Flood kind of does that taunting of Belinda and Ruby, and we get a little bit of explanation there as to what her purpose was the whole time. But I'll get back to her in a little bit. But the Rani's gone, and things start to pick up a notch now. Now they're really coming up with a plan of what they're going to do and how they're going to stop her. And this is where we come to another up. Because this whole sequence where Unit Tower basically turns into this battle bridge and they get into battle mode, that was so epic. I loved it. It was really cinematic. Now, I didn't personally watch this episode in the cinema, but Danny did, and he said to me that this sequence was really, really amazing to be seen on a cinema screen with the surround sound. He said it was really, really cool to hear in the cinema. Hear and see in the cinema, I guess. This is the kind of sequence where you can really see those Disney dollars. You can see where the money went. But I also really like it because it wasn't too polished. Obviously, it's not Doctor Who of old where you have flimsy sets, but it didn't feel too clean, if that makes sense. We had smoke and fire and explosions and windows smashing. Like, it felt like there was a real battle going on as opposed to just lots of lasers and everyone in the building is unscathed. So I really, really loved that detail, and it actually really, really got me excited for the war between the land and the sea, because the majority of the characters that were in this scene are going to be in the war between the land and the sea, or at least the unit characters. You've got Shirley, you've got Kate, you've got Colonel Sexy. One day I'll call him by his actual name, but not today. So it really gave you an idea of maybe what we're going to see in the war between the land and the sea, and it certainly got me more hyped for this spin-off that we're going to get. Obviously, we did get a teaser trailer for it. I will discuss that, not in this review, but we still have a spoiler discussion coming later in the week, so don't worry, we will cover that, we will talk about that. But based on that trailer and this scene, I'm very excited for what that spin-off is going to offer, because it really got into the nitty-gritty of UNIT, and it actually kind of gave me Star Trek vibes. This idea of Kate as the commander, giving her orders, commanding the ship. You've got Colonel Sexy at her side there, almost like her number one, which is something you obviously see in Star Trek. Then you've got everybody else kind of doing their part, working together towards this collective goal. And I think it really did have that kind of battle vibe to it, this kind of army vibe where they all have their role, they all have their purpose, and together they're achieving what they need to achieve as a team. And I really, really thought this was a great, epic scene. And those bone creatures, the bone beasts, I mean, last week I was like, what is the point of them? And this week, at least we did get a bit of an explanation of what they are, why they exist. But just seeing them walking over London and being blasted by the galvanic beam or whatever other weaponry was at Unit's disposal, I think it actually looked really, really cool. It could have been clunky, it could have looked... I actually really enjoyed this sequence. So then, in amongst all of this, Kate's got it covered, Colonel Sexy's got it covered. The Doctor, he tricked the Rani and he calls her hoverboard to him so he can get into the Bone Palace. Now, last week I downed the Rani on the hoverboard. I thought it looked ridiculous. I thought it looked really iffy CGI. Wasn't a fan. Weirdly though, this week, I actually quite liked it. It looked much better this week. With the Doctor on it. And it's nothing to do with which character was using it, but I just think the sequence this week looked a lot better. I think they kind of were further, there was more distance between the camera and what was being shown, so it kind of didn't make it look quite so iffy in terms of the CGI. The distance worked in its favour. It really does go to show that something can work if done correctly. Last week I feel the real close-up of it really highlighted that this was done on a green screen and it just looked a bit ridiculous in my mind. This week though, the Doctor kind of zooming around London, going through the inside of the bone creature, I think it actually looked really, really cool. So just goes to show, I can take things back if they are redeemed, and this week I think it was a little bit better. Still not the biggest fan of the hoverboard in general, but this week it definitely looks better. So the Doctor arrives to stop the Rani's plan, but not before Omega starts to emerge from below. And I'm afraid this does lead me to another down. When it comes to the Omega reveal, the phrase I keep using is, what a waste. What a waste of potential for a returning villain in the show. You have all that build-up, only for him to be thwarted within 5 minutes of arriving, and don't even get me started on the design. What the hell was that? I said last week I really hope they don't ruin the design of Omega. I hope they come back with the mask. What the hell that was, I have no idea, but it absolutely was not what I was hoping for. It was not Omega, it was just a big skeleton beast thing. I wasn't a fan, really wasn't a fan of what they'd done with Omega there. And again, what a waste. What a waste of a character. I mean, quite honestly, this could have been any sort of evil monster creature. And to be honest, I think it would have been better if it had been. But what we get instead is this really rushed and disappointing treatment of a legacy character that could have had a really great arc, returning arc, in the same vein as the Master had in Series 3. Omega's return could have been something really grand, something really deep and meaningful for the continuation of Doctor Who. We could have had this real exploration of who Omega is and how we're going to explore it in this new era of the show, like we saw with the Master returning when John Sim played the character. But that is not what we got here. This was such a waste. We should have had this grand, wow, Omega's back, and I mean, even the Rani's arc was over pretty quickly within this scene. All of that build up again, she's gone. What it really felt like is this is the danger that we've been talking about. You've got too many pots on the stove, too much going on, introduce too many things, and then things don't make sense or feel really undercooked, and you're not giving things enough attention because there's so much going on. What it actually felt like in this episode is that the Poppy arc was the really important thing and the thing they really wanted to focus on, and they kind of realised at some point that we've got to quickly dispatch of these bad guys that we've introduced so we can get back to the Poppy arc. That's kind of what it felt like. Suddenly in the middle they thought, oh, quickly, we've got to stop Omega and the Rani, and then they were just quickly done with. And that was disappointing. They were the characters that really could have had some deep stories here. They're the legacy characters that people were going, oh, they've brought back this, what could it mean? Evidently it means nothing. It means nothing at all. It means they're going to be thwarted within 5 minutes. The Doctor's going to just shoot them. That's another thing I've seen a lot of people point out. They made the effort of designing the Sonic to not look like a gun, even though the Sonic doesn't really look like a gun, only to then give the Doctor a gun to shoot Omega with. Confusing. But overall, what I really wish would have happened is that Mrs. Flood would have remained the one and only Rani, and we focused deeply on that character, and Omega was never mentioned and saved for a real meaningful return later down the line. But instead, both these stories felt massively undercooked and like a waste. Now, what I will say, though, is I am glad that Mrs. Flood did survive. Also, that two Ronnies gag, absolutely hilarious. I know some people, probably younger people, maybe those outside of the UK, might not have understood that reference, but that was beautiful. Brilliantly done. We've all been joking about it in the last 2 weeks, the two Ranies, the two Ronnies. Brilliantly done. But I'm glad that Mrs. Flood is still out there. She's still the Rani, and I'm hoping that in the future that's going to come back and we're going to see Anita Dobson returning as the Rani. Now, I wouldn't be surprised maybe if the boss that we have been kind of wondering about, that Anita mentions later in the episode, does turn out to be Mrs. Flood's the Rani. But quite honestly, my faith in big bad villain plot lines has wavered slightly. So we'll see where that goes. So the Rani's been eaten. Mrs. Flood has skedaddled. Omega has been blasted back into the Underverse. Ruby has managed to stop Conrad and stop the wishes, end the wish. And then the big question is, did Poppy make it? Did Poppy survive the end of the wish? Now, I'm not going to lie, it was actually quite tense that moment that the TARDIS landed and the big question was, is Poppy still inside the box? Everyone gathered there. I did feel this connection the Doctor had to Poppy, and I was quite excited to see where this was going to go. It did feel slightly odd. It did feel a little bit, I'm not sure how I feel about this with regards to Belinda and the Doctor having a child together, but I was willing to go along with it. Because I was really interested to see what this dynamic would be, particularly with the Doctor having a child. But yes, this moment was quite tense while the doors opened, everyone waiting to see if their hard work had paid off. Also, did anyone else notice the way that Kate held on to Colonel Sexy there? Oh my god! And then later on, when Shirley noticed, the face she pulled was basically the face I pulled when he kind of almost kissed her. Did he kiss her on the cheek? He hugged her. There was something going on there. Shirley noticed it, and I was like, and she did the same thing. Shirley ships it too, just saying. Anyway, not the point of this scene. It's the thing I noticed in this scene, but that's not the point of this scene. So, Poppy survives. Poppy is still inside the box. Everyone's happy. It's all smiles. Everything's great. Looks like we're going to have a happy ending. And then we have this really heartbreaking scene. And it gets an up because I think it was a really, really powerful scene. The moment that Belinda and 15 are passing Poppy's coat between each other and it slowly gets smaller and smaller and less significant until it disappears, all while Ruby is watching it happening. Oh my god, that was beautiful! Really sad, but really well done. First of all, the use of the music in this scene, really, really well done. That look of realization on Ruby's face when she realizes that Poppy has kind of just blinked out of existence there. And as I just said, I was really looking forward to kind of seeing this dynamic of the Doctor being a parent and maybe that being the direction the show was going to go in and maybe doing something completely new and different. And I was quite excited for that. But then I really felt that loss, despite the fact that the characters themselves didn't even remember it and didn't feel the loss. I felt that loss for them. And I think a lot of that comes down to Millie Gibson's performance in this scene. I think this is one of Millie Gibson's strongest performances as Ruby. She really conveyed that feeling of loss, that sense of loss, without really saying many words. It was all in her face. And we felt it so strongly because of how strongly she showed it. And it was really well done, really strong performance, and such a moving scene. I think also just this episode in general in terms of Ruby's story was really, really strong. The whole concept of her rescuing Desiderium, or Joe, and taking him under her wing, bringing him to Carla, relating to him as a foundling, I think worked really well. Then also relating to Poppy, because the same thing that happened to Poppy, blinking out of existence, also happened to Ruby. I think there was a lot of connections here that you really felt with Ruby, and I think even though we've only had 8 episodes, well, 9 and a bit, 9.5. She wasn't in last week's episode massively, but even though we haven't had that long with her, I feel like we now do have these connections with the character, so it was really nice to see these ties and these connections between Ruby and these characters. I think it was a good episode for her as a character. And I think because of that, it worked really well for her to be the one to remember Poppy and to convince everybody else that this was a real thing. She wasn't imagining it, that she should be trusted and that what she's saying is true. I think that worked really, really well as well. But just in general, I think Ruby as a character in this episode was pretty good. I loved it when she asked if she could punch Conrad and Kate was like, yes, you can. Like, of all the people who should be punching Conrad, I think Ruby is top of that list. I kind of wish she had. But again, it just shows the kind of character she is, because she doesn't do that. She wishes for him to be happy. She doesn't wish him harm. Despite all the things he's done, she feels sorry for him and she gives him leniency. She says, I just wish that you were happy. And if you were happy, everyone else would be happy. It's actually quite interesting because I feel like I've done a bit of a U-turn with regards to my thoughts on Belinda and Ruby, because originally Ruby was the character that I didn't really warm to her. I was like, yeah. Then Belinda came along and I was so excited to see where this character was going to go, what the dynamic was going to be. This episode has actually switched that back round again, and I've kind of gone back to preferring Ruby over Belinda, and I'll get to why in just a second. But I really think that this has been a really strong episode for Ruby. In fact, this one and Lucky Day changed my mind on Ruby slightly. And yeah, my thoughts on her and Belinda have flipped a little bit, which is very interesting. But anyway, Ruby manages to convince everyone that Poppy is in fact real, and the Doctor realises that the only way to bring her back is for him to sacrifice himself. In order to change time in that very tiny way, he's going to have to sacrifice himself, which he then goes to do, only to then realise or find out afterwards, she's not even his daughter. Poppy is not even his daughter. This is where we come to probably my biggest gripe with this episode, my strongest down for this episode. I don't know about anybody else, but I felt really cheated by this revelation that Belinda had always been Poppy's mum, that Belinda had always been trying to get home to her daughter. Now, I think the biggest thing here is we have these flashbacks to scenes that we'd previously seen in episodes of this season. But instead of being a flashback to then reveal something that we then go, oh, that's what that meant. They just changed the dialogue entirely. They just gave us entire additional things to these scenes that we never saw. And they kind of tried to gaslight us into thinking that we'd missed something. No, that doesn't work. It does not work. Now, if this had always been Belinda's arc, if this from the beginning had been Belinda has always been trying to get home to her daughter, then they finally get back to Earth, but they're trapped in this wish world, and suddenly her daughter blinks out of existence, and the Doctor then sacrifices himself to bring back Belinda's daughter to her. Because he'd had this whole season of realising how important she is to Belinda, knowing how devastated Belinda would be to lose her child, that he would then, without hesitation, sacrifice himself to bring her back for Belinda. That would have been so much better. But instead, we had a completely different storyline going on where we actually didn't really know much about Belinda at all. And then this was kind of shoehorned in at the end, but I felt no connection to it because you just told us it in the last 10 minutes. This hasn't been built towards. I haven't been able to kind of build the pieces together and feel a connection and really feel sorry for Belinda because she's lost her child. Where did this come from? This should have been layered into the story so that we really felt it. And instead, I'm just like, this is a completely different character. Now I know, before anyone says anything, the whole point is that the timeline has been changed. Everything's been different. To bring back Poppy, the timeline changed. Belinda was never, all of the events that we saw didn't happen the way we saw them. But it still feels like a cheat to me. What do you think? And then, of course, we had this whole setup of Poppy being the Doctor's daughter. And I was actually really excited to explore that. As I've said, I thought this was going to be so interesting, a new direction for the show to go in. I was looking forward to learning that there might be a connection between Poppy and Susan, who didn't pop up in this episode, by the way. Massively disappointing. I thought we were going to see Susan return. That's where this looked like it was heading. No Susan. And even though I may have been a little bit like, yeah, not sure how I feel about the whole Susan and Poppy being related, but I would have preferred that to what we got here. Which was, turns out, Poppy's not your daughter, she's actually Belinda's daughter, and you knew that the whole time apparently, but actually you didn't know that the whole time, and no, it didn't work for me. It did not work for me at all. And this is a big reason why I've changed my mind so much on Belinda as a character, because this just changes everything, and the whole dynamic is just different now, and I'm not a fan of it. So anyway, as it turns out, the Doctor doesn't have a daughter. Belinda has a daughter. Belinda always had a daughter, apparently. But no, the Doctor did all that sacrificing. Now it's time to go regenerate. Now, I am going to give an up to the regeneration sequence, okay? First of all, I know it happened before the Poppy not being the Doctor's daughter reveal, but Jodie Whittaker. Jodie Whittaker returns. That was unexpected. That was really unexpected, but it was really lovely to see them two interact, to have 13 arrive there, to kind of give 15 a helping hand along the way, to give him some reassurance. I think that worked really, really well, and I'm really glad to see here that she gave him that advice of don't go in fear, go with that lovely smile. I love that. I have not been such a big of a fan of regeneration being treated like this big dying moment. I always like to look at the fact that regeneration is not dying, it's their survival. They continue living, they just change their face. They don't lose their memories, they still have all of that experience. They just change their appearance and continue living. So I've not been a big fan of when regeneration is treated like this massive dying moment. I understand a bit of sadness. Obviously there is some sadness that they don't get to be themselves anymore and they're going to change. But they don't lose their core elements, they don't lose their memories, they don't lose anything that makes them the Doctor. They just look different. So I was really glad here that 13 kind of gave that approach to 15. You know, don't be scared. Keep smiling. You're going to continue living. So I really, really liked that. Also, really, really glad Bi-Generation is done with, because if this had continued as another Bi-Generation, I don't think I would have been very happy with that. Bi-Generation needs to go away now. Okay, it's been used too many times at this point. It's been used twice, and that's too many times. As I said last week, I think Bi-Generation, or maybe the week before, I can't remember, Bi-Generation, the more you think about it, the more problems it has. So, really glad we just had a good old bog standard regeneration here. Well, ish. Then we come to the actual regeneration moment itself. Now, first of all, I really, really liked that he went to be with Joy from Joy to the World. It's nice that he didn't have to be alone. It was nice that we had that little callback there. One thing I will say, though, do feel a bit sorry for Ruby, because Ruby didn't get a goodbye. Joy got a goodbye. Ruby didn't get a goodbye, which seems a little bit strange to me. Now, maybe this was a deleted scene. I don't know what happened, but nice to see that he went to Joy. But it was a little bit like, do you remember I talk about the farewell tour of 10, and he visits the great-great-granddaughter of Joan Redfern, and it just feels like of all the people to visit, this one seems so out of place because they were in one episode, but then there were people that he spent more time with that didn't get a visit. It just felt a bit like that. Like, Ruby didn't get a goodbye, but Joy did. But it was nice that Joy was there to oversee the regeneration and he didn't have to be alone. The music for this scene, beautiful. Well done, sir, Mr. Murray Gold. As always. The music was beautiful. The regeneration itself, I think, looked really, really impressive. I do quite like it when it gets really big. I did think the staging of it was slightly odd, that the Doctor wasn't falling out of the TARDIS, because he was leaning so far forward. I was thinking, I guess so you don't explode the TARDIS with all your regeneration energy like 10 did, but why are you leaning so far out of the TARDIS? But anyway, that looked pretty cool. I do like a good, impressive regeneration. Now, I'm still in two minds. I don't know quite how I feel about who he regenerates into. But the sequence itself was pretty impressive. I can imagine looked really, really good on a cinema screen. So for that, the up is deserved. Then, of course, we do have Billie Piper. This gets neither an up or a down. I still need to take a lot longer to process what I think about this. I do feel like perhaps there's a little bit of over-reliance on the past here. You know, we saw with David Tennant and Catherine Tate returning. It's no secret why that was done. Feel like there's a similar air of that going on here with Billie Piper. Interestingly, she's not credited as the Doctor, so I don't think that she is the Doctor. Somehow I think, as a lot of you have also suggested, that this is connected to the fact that the Doctor went into the heart of the TARDIS, into the time vortex, and the last time that was done was when Rose looked into the heart of the TARDIS, became the bad wolf. So I think there's a connection there somehow, and it's something to do with him looking into the heart of the TARDIS or going into the time vortex. I think that's definitely, when I say definitely, that's my theory at the moment anyway. But yeah, in terms of it being Billie Piper, I'm not sure. I quite honestly think I would have preferred it if the episode had just ended with him regenerating, but us not seeing who he regenerated into. Obviously, they don't know. You know, they've not cast the next Doctor yet. Billie Piper is there somehow, and we need to get some answers to that. But I think I would have been quite happy for them to have just left it with him regenerating and we not see who the next face is. And then once they've cast the next Doctor, that's how the next story starts. We see who it is. Yeah, not sure. I think, to be honest, when they go for the next Doctor, the best approach, in my mind, is when they cast someone unknown. And it's Doctor Who that then blasts them into the stratosphere, like Matt Smith. So I think when they cast someone that's so well known, I think that's where issues lie. Because when it's someone popular, say like Ncuti Gatwa, he's in high demand. And when you come to issues like, is the show going to continue or not, that actor is not going to stick around. And then you get into this situation where they want to leave, they need to regenerate, and then you've got no one to fill the shoes. Quick, let's get Billie Piper in, and then we'll find a story to revolve around Billie Piper for an episode or two. That's what it feels like to me. Don't get me wrong, my reaction when it first happened was, what? And of course I'm intrigued and I'm going to watch to find out what the hell this all means, but I can't help but feel like this was clearly done to keep people watching, keep people gripped, and to rely heavily on nostalgia here. I definitely think this was a better episode than Wishworld. There were certainly some really great moments in the episode, but there were also some major downs as well. I think my biggest criticism is that there's just too much going on, and then that results in things feeling undercooked, characters being overlooked, characters being wasted, and that's very disappointing to see. But then there were some really great moments in the episode as well. You had characters like Anita returning, which was really unexpected, but really lovely to see. But sometimes that comes at the expense of the great return of Omega, you know? Now, one thing I will say, and it's something we've been saying this whole time, the longer runtime made all the difference. Don't know about anybody else, but I felt like, pacing-wise at least, this episode felt much better. And it just goes to show what we've been saying this whole time. An extra 10-15 minutes on the episode runtime really does make a difference. Pacing was not an issue for me this week at all. The longer runtime absolutely worked. Glad that we had a longer episode. It felt like we really had a chance to see things unfold rather than just jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing. There were still issues with this episode, but in general, the longer runtime definitely worked in its favour. Obviously, the return of Billie Piper in some form, massively intriguing. Of course, it's got the hooks are in, and I'm excited to see where this is going to go. You just heard my thoughts on that. I do have more thoughts on the Billie Piper reveal and the regeneration in general. My initial reaction to that is available on the channel now. We put that up last night, so you can watch that, where I talk about that in a little bit more detail. But obviously, this is very sad in terms of saying goodbye to Ncuti Gatwa. I really felt like we were just starting to get deeper with the character, to see a different side to this character, really get to grips with him. And now he's gone, which is quite sad. In terms of being a successful or good send-off for Ncuti, it's mixed for me. Obviously, he decided he wanted to go. I think we are all aware at this point that this was a decision made later on and reshoots did have to be done. For the most part, I don't think you can really tell that things were tacked on or changed. Obviously, I think the Billie Piper thing was definitely tacked on at the last minute. And there were things reworked to make this a regeneration story. And because of that, I feel like some of the earlier moments in the episode didn't really take into consideration that this was going to be this Doctor's final episode, because at the time of filming, that wasn't necessarily the case. Later scenes obviously did lean into this being, we're going to see the Doctor regenerate, but I think maybe the earlier moments in the episode didn't really have that in mind, because at the time that wasn't what the story was going to be. I guess in terms of it being a surprise regeneration, something is taken away by the fact that you don't then, usually there's a reveal beforehand. You know the actor's leaving, you know someone else is going to step into the role, so there's a hype built up there because you're excited to see. Part of me is a little bit glad that it was a surprise, because quite often regenerations aren't a surprise, but at the same time there were so many things flying around and so many questions. I think a lot of people went into this episode thinking this was where the direction the episode was going to go in. So although it was a surprise in as much as it hadn't been officially announced that Ncuti was leaving, it also wasn't a surprise because I think a lot of people kind of had suspicions that this was the direction we were going to be going in anyway. I think the biggest surprise obviously was Billie Piper being who he regenerated into, but that in itself just raises so many questions, and I'm still undecided on whether I like this or not. But overall, I think it is very sad that Ncuti has stepped away. I kind of felt, it's strange because I didn't really feel that great sense of loss. because I didn't feel like we'd really had a chance to get to know him. And as I say, we were just starting to get there, and now it's over. And I was just starting to really get to grips with this character and think, oh, okay, yeah, now we're seeing something, and now that's it. So I do feel a bit sorry for Ncuti Gat, where I don't feel like he really had a chance to blossom and shine as the Doctor. It feels like we only just met him. Hopefully, time will be kind and people will look back on these episodes and really, really love what this Doctor did and things. But I just think it's a shame that we never really got to fully know this Doctor, and now he's stepping away. Obviously, this was a jam-packed episode, so there are things that I haven't mentioned here, but of course we are going to have a spoiler discussion, so if there's something we didn't mention here in much detail, then we'll probably be discussing it later in the week in our discussion. Of course, there were lots of Easter eggs as well. They didn't go unnoticed, but we'll have a whole video on that too, breaking down the episode, all the references, all the Easter eggs as well. This is the last one of the series, but if you haven't watched any of the coverage of the previous 7 episodes, then they're all available as well, so do go and check those out as well. And we're not going anywhere, folks. Just because this season has ended doesn't mean we're disappearing. We've got the war between the land and the sea coming very soon. Well, we hope very soon. It's coming at some point. In the meantime, though, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.